You've all heard of comfort food, the kind of food you like to eat regardless of its nutritional value, but it just makes you feel good. Did you know movies operate the same way? That's right, we're going to talk about the movies that we like regardless of critical praise, box office totals, and overall audience reception. These are the movies we love for being what they are, why they are, and how they are. These are our comfort flicks.
Who's there?
Did you think I wouldn't know?
Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men? The Shadow.
And this is a movie I really wanted to talk about in some form or another. It's too good for cinema schlock, but it's also too well known to be considered a rare delicacy. So that's why I was really excited to come up with this show idea so we could talk about this one kind of in the middle. The Shadow. It came out in 1994. It was directed by Russell Mulcahy, who most people know directed Highlander. And it was also written by David Koepp, who, after this movie, had a pretty strong pedigree in superhero movies, as he wrote the first Spider-Man movie. But even before that, wrote Jurassic Park.
I think he had a hand in Lost World. He got eaten in Lost World. But sometimes hit and miss.
The Shadow, of course, is based on, well, pretty much a combination of things from the early 20th century, specifically the radio show, which notoriously starred Orson Welles, but also became so popular that it became a series of pulp novels. Of course, Batman was a massive, colossal success. The comics labels were still being very resistant to selling off the rights, so the only things they could fall back on was the old pulp novels.
Then they didn't want to really deal with the big names because of Batman Returns. As much as we love it, that did have a lot of controversy with the direction it took.
Yeah.
So they were a little hesitant to touch on actual characters. Like, that's why you have Captain America, and you know about that one.
It seems the Americans have made a poor choice for their champion. Pity him!
Superman was the last one, was in 1990, and that was Quest for
Quest for Peace and that.
So it's kind of like they wanted to avoid more known superheroes and have a little more freedom, I think.
Yeah, and
so they were going for the more pulpy, early, like predating Marvel.
Yeah.
Probably not predating, but like beforehand stuff.
And additionally, because Batman did so well, because it was so dark, and because, and obviously that was something that people, especially in the 90s, were really liking, the dark and gritty stuff. They were like, well, let's go back to the old pulp novels and some of the heroes there, which, yes, to their credit, that was an age where we had some really interesting but also very dark heroes. The Shadow was kind of at the forefront of it, and really, when you think about it, a lot of the dark heroes that have come since, you can say took some cues from The Shadow. The fascinating thing about this one was that originally Sam Raimi wanted to make this movie, but at the time there was still a struggle on trying to get the rights, and Sam Raimi got impatient and said, you know what? Screw it, I'm going to come up with my own superhero. And he did, and we got Darkman for it.
I think it's also better that he did Darkman, because then he got to do his own thing. He could make a hard R movie, go to town with the effects and the comic booky nature, and not be bound to anything, nor a studio breathing down your neck.
Yeah,
thing.
And there's also no weight of expectation from fans going like, oh, it's not like it.
Well, case in point, you don't have that situation so much with shows like The Shadow, Phantom, the older stuff, because most of the people who remember those things are kind of old and wouldn't probably give a crap.
Kind of old and or dead.
So you don't have that pre-existing fan base, really. It's more the backhand research where you know it's something, you've never seen it, you see the movie, and then you go back and read it.
Yeah.
Or listen to it.
And I will tell you now, The Shadow is definitely something that's worth going back and researching, because after the movie came out, I actually did grab a lot of the old radio shows from back in the day when radio was king, and it's a really entertaining show, and I actually would say it's something that deserves to be studied as far as sound mixing, particularly in the age of radio from that time period. But the fascinating thing about this movie is that it's not just an adaptation of the radio series, but it was also a collage of the radio show and the pulp novels. In fact, a lot of ideas became like a combination and became this kind of glorious cake. So on one side, you got a lot of the great film noir elements that were alluded to in the radio show, but then you got these great over-the-top things that were alluded to in the pulp novel, specifically the villain of Shi Wan Khan and the whole idea of Genghis Khan and the idea that he's a descendant of him and that he wants to do the big take over the world thing.
I watched it when I was young. It actually freaked me out a little bit because it's pretty violent for a PG-13 movie. Like, I was 12-ish, you know, like, the purple was scary. The thing would actually stab you. It almost cuts his throat open. Like, it bites and people are jumping off. I mean, they weren't holding back so much. I mean, they should. When a guy jumps off a building, he hits.
Yeah.
You know? But, I mean, granted, it's funny now.
And
but
they use it as a scene transition, which is kind of amazing.
Now I respect that. My issue is when I remember first seeing it, and even watching it now, I don't see the shadow enough. It's that his shadow organization, the people who work for him, his network, all that stuff, you see it once. Mm-hmm. You see the network once, you see his lair once. And that's it. And I'm like, it looks so cool. It's so interesting. Could you have not worked that in more? Every time he fought something, it was a very short scene. His fights were very short.
Yeah, a lot of it seemed to be more about the meeting of the wills. I mean, even the final confrontation between him and Shi Wan Khan.
I thought that was fine. At that point, I was kind of like, okay, just move along.
Yeah.
But I kind of wanted to see more him doing shadowy things. I don't want to say shadowy things, but just be the shadow. My second thing, and it would require a little adjusting of the plotting of just some information. I actually feel that they could have totally cut that entire opening. We don't need to see any of that. It could be referenced. You could even show it in flashback when he's sleeping. You could have a flashback of him training with the Toku and seeing the dagger, you know, the Purba, and fighting with it and stuff. And all that stuff being flashback, and just start with the crawl of him being the shadow, because it tells you everything, and start with him as the shadow.
You don't even need the crawl. You could just start it with the whole thing
I think
of the
the
bridge.
crawl would help just a little bit, because it was pulpy, it worked. But, like, don't start with him, the dude going in there, and Alec Baldwin is
wearing a fabulous wig with
nails
Fu Manchu nails.
Like, that would be cool in flashbacks or in, like, dream sequences, and see, like, that's his past. That's what he used to be. Like, leave a little mystery to that at first. Like, especially when Khan sees him and goes, "Oh, I know who you were." It's like, who were you? And then you see in, like, some flashbacks, like, oh, that's who he was. But we've already been introduced to
Build
him.
up some mystery. I mean, visually, he's supposed to be a mysterious character. Let's have...
Yeah, you could have started just on the bridge.
I mean, a recent example, which I think did this really well as far as integrating backstory, was Captain Marvel, actually. Where it throws us right into the deep end with her as the Kree.
And then just show us everything later.
And as she finds out more, we find out more. You could still play with that. And I think the reason why we feel that way is because there's so much to love in this movie. First off, on a technical level, it still holds up.
Yeah.
We just watched it, and we were astonished by how well the practical effects hold up. There's a lot of gorgeous model work done of the New York cityscape, particularly New York, I think 1930s?
Yeah.
1930s cityscape. Still looks amazing. Very Gilliam-esque, very dark city. Looks great. A lot of lighting effects is great. The production design is top-notch. I mean, and there's a lot of good practical work. And even what little CGI work is in there is minimalist. And
it just enhances it, or it's something you would have to use.
And the cast is actually all game for it, and their performances all match the tone that what Russell Mulcahy's going for. Specifically, there was never one performance in there where I felt like they were going too camp.
And one thing I pointed out after we watched it, I said, actually, one of the cool things of Lamont the Shadow, is that he's not emo. Mm-hmm. He's living his life, and I mean, he's not ignoring his past. He's not pretending it didn't exist. He totally acknowledges it. He clearly has guilt for it, but he's not letting it rule his complete psyche. He's relatively well put together. Like, he just doesn't want to keep bringing it up because he's like, that's in the past. I don't want to dwell on it. Unlike a lot of superheroes who constantly rag on the past, and I'm like, dude, keep moving forward. You're doing your shadowy stuff.
You're right. I love the fact that we don't have a hero character who's brooding on it too much.
He really didn't brood. Even when he was having like horrible he has a horrible nightmare where he rips his face off and he's the villain.
Yeah, poltergeist level nightmare.
That's pretty scary. And he tells Margot,
I dreamed I tore all the skin off my face and was somebody else underneath.
You have problems.
Chow Yun-fat was originally up to play Shi Wan Khan, but they found Asian actor John Lone. Even if you don't get much as far as the character's depth, as long as the character has a good personality, that makes up for it in spades. And that's one thing I really like there, is that even though he's building himself out to be the descendant of Genghis Khan and that he's a conqueror and all that, I love that he still has aspirations of being the sophisticate.
He's still a guy.
Yeah. I love
cares about.
I love the bit where he's talking about world conquest, but then he adjourns to ask him where he got his tie.
That is a lovely tie, by the way. May I ask where you acquire it?
Brooks Brothers,
Is that Midtown?
45th and Madison. You are a barbarian.
But you later see him wearing a nice tie.
Nice tie.
Thank you.
He's like, oh, nice. it's like
I love that.
It's like little things. I kind of wish he wore the suit more often because he actually
Yeah.
it works, I'm like, but he liked his old regal outfits.
He was a master of elaborate executions. He had 3 executions in this movie. All of them were absolutely, well, I will say, chilling at first glance, but also very inventive.
He doesn't do anything simply, but he seems to have a good time doing it. And a villain that enjoys their villainy is always a good thing.
Yeah.
Especially with comic or pulpy type stuff. You
Yeah.
gotta have some fun.
The fact that we have Tim Curry and Ian McKellen in scenes together.
It was Ian McKellen's first big budget movie.
Yeah. According to trivia, it was kind of daunting for him because he had never done a movie of this magnitude before, but fortunately, because Tim Curry he had worked with in a production of, I believe, Amadeus. He'd never been to Hollywood prior to this point, but Tim Curry, fortunately, had already kind of been integrated and they had worked together, so he was able to kind of help usher him in to know how to make
someone he knew on set.
Exactly. And Tim Curry, of course, is, reliably Tim Curry.
He chewed the scenery whenever he could.
Hell, he was spittling all over the scenery in his last scene with the shadow.
I actually was thinking, this is after you did Three Musketeers, where that scenery you just gnawed on the whole movie. So I'm like, oh yeah, you're still gnawing.
Oh, that's one we have to do in the future.
And that movie was special.
Three Musketeers is special, especially because of Tim Curry. And that's the thing I got to applaud about the movie, is that it doesn't go so silly that you can
No, the silliness is within reason. It's good. It balances it properly. It doesn't get cheesy. I don't feel it ever got cheesy, and I will argue it didn't feel campy at any points. It could have, and I didn't feel it.
And actually, the movie does pull off scenes with actual charm in it, especially in a lot of the scenes between Lamont and Margot.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Comment section below. I don't think it was ever in the radio show that Margot had latent psychic ability. I think this may have been a new invention specifically for the movie. But honestly, I like it because it does enhance the connection they have between each other, and it does add for one of the funniest banter scenes between the two of them.
Well, one thing I have a huge chip on my shoulders, forced romances in movies. Like, why are these two hooking up? This film, you could see the chemistry from the beginning, and it evolved the entire... So when they're getting a big old kiss at the end, you're like, no man, that was earned.
It was
like, they worked it in. They are best buddies. They're through and through this. So I was like, okay,
yeah,
that's fine.
And I was worried when we were sitting down watching is that we were going to have a memory cheat scenario, because I thought, it was fine all the way through it. But I remember, because David Koepp is the kind of the writer that he is, a lot of the early scenes, particularly the scene where they first meet, is a touch clunky. First, they're at the club, gets her a wine, but then very promptly they go to a Chinese restaurant. It's like, don't you want you go to a posh club, which probably has its own really nice food, but then you very...
See, I kind of took that as this... It's a kind of a little bit of a stereotype that happens in some films where the super rich people are at the fancy place, and in the end, it's like Tony Stark, I just want a burger. It's like, it's the, I can afford... escargot and all the fancy stuff, but in the end, you just want some basic food. And I did like that it was Chinese food, because it did expose the fact that he could speak Mandarin, and he would know Chinese food because he lived in that area for a long time.
I'd say if there's anything they should try to do, especially in the age of Netflix movies being made, or even then, honestly, I think it would have a stronger life, maybe even a stronger life as a TV series.
Yeah.
Possibly.
That could be good.
Yeah, honestly.
I think stuff like this might be better on the lower scale of like Netflix, Amazon, stuff like that, miniseries.
Yeah.
I mean, come on, The Boys did amazing on Amazon, and that's
Boys.
not a show that a comic that a lot of people are familiar with, but the concept could work, and that went well.
Yes, it did.
So it might be the smaller scales or where stuff like this will work better if they chose to go that route in the future. Compared
to stuff like Judge Dredd and even The Phantom, the one thing I will say The Shadow has going for it is that everyone's last exposure to it is this movie, and this movie is...
It's not that bad. Most just didn't see it. To be
Yeah, a
honest.
lot of people just didn't see it, but it is still an incredibly entertaining film. Visually, it's stunning.
Awesome soundtrack.
Jerry
Music is
Jared Goldsmith's score is outstanding.
still stuck in my head.
It's just that right level of theatrical, but at the same time, it has this really great darkness about
Kind
it.
of
which
has
is-
a little bit of a, I don't want to say Batman like Tim Burton Batman era, but it's got a little bit like a lot of the French horn sounds and a lot of the deeper horn sounds. So a little bit more foreboding, but still kind of epic at the same time.
Yeah, there was. It definitely complemented the scale of the
Oh,
production
yeah.
that they were doing. I just think, and especially from that time period when the studios were still trying to get a grasp on why things went so well with Batman, I think that this was actually one of their more stronger efforts that they put into it.
I think
And-
that there's effort into this film.
Yeah.
It also came out at the worst time ever for, like, you thought the summer of 1989 was a bad time to release a movie. Yeah, the summer of 1994 was pretty bad too. 'Cause you
Yeah.
had Lion King, you had Forrest Gump, and then you had True Lies.
Yeah.
All within like 3-week time frame.
And that movie was released right in the smack dab in the middle of it.
Yeah.
That was not a good time.
And this is back when we did not have megaplexes at that time.
Yeah, and
So these were small theaters, had like 6 theaters per actual theater. This is before the megaplexes. They
And
did not exist.
also, contrary to what he may think of himself, I don't think Alec Baldwin had the box office draw that he thought. I don't think so.
Hollywood just can't get out of that golden age and thinks that actors sell movies. And I'm like, unless they are like the star and it all hinges on something. Like I could see like Jim Carrey back in the 90s where he basically, if he wasn't in this movie, the movie wouldn't exist.
Mhm.
I kind of could see people going to see for him. But that was exceptionally rare, and it was only for like 2 or 3 movies.
Mhm.
Again, very rare situation, and it usually required a very uniquely talented actor. But on the grand scheme, I do not think that's a thing. So saying that, using that as a staying power and whatnot. So I think casting Alec Baldwin was fine. He was
Yeah.
perfectly fine.
He had a great voice
I don't think
for
it was
it.
a sell to it. I don't think, to be honest, I don't even know how they marketed this movie. I can't remember.
I can't even remember actually, I don't even remember any trailers for it. I do remember the poster because it did have a very
Yeah,
fantastic.
the poster, I remember.
It had a fantastic image, very similar to the Dick Tracy, like kind of like a flip side yin yang to Dick Tracy's advertising campaign. But the one thing I could definitely say, as far as Baldwin, to his credit, when he's the Shadow, he embodies the Shadow. He even takes a lot of the classic lines from the radio show. Of course, the classic "Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men?" The Shadow knows. He takes those classic lines and he makes them his own.
The weed of crime bears bitter fruit.
He still did a good job making the Shadow a striking presence to make him stay within your mind. And I kind of urge a lot of, especially people of the younger age who have not seen this movie yet, I kind of urge y'all to see this.
It's a good movie.
Yeah, it's a good
Watch
movie.
it.
Yeah,
They're
and
not doing anything right now.
are any of us truly? The good news is it is widely available. It is actually on most streaming services, and in fact, Shout Factory, who I praise and to no end because of the amazing work they do on their special edition DVDs, also did one for The Shadow as well. So you have plenty of ways in order to see this movie. So I'd say jump at it, get a chance to watch it. It's definitely not the level of complexities that stuff like Winter Soldier or any of the MCU is.
Not everything has to be.
But not everything has to be. And that's kind of the whole point of comfort flicks, is that these are movies that just bring something out in you. They just make you just enjoy watching movies. And to that end, see you next time.